Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, though the sky was clear. Not weather, not storm. Hoofbeats, and they weren't waiting for nightfall this time. The prairie grass moved like a tide under the afternoon wind. Mary stood on the porch, the boy clutching her skirts as riders appeared one by one along the horizon. First 5, then 10, then more. They moved slow, deliberate, as if they already knew what they'd find here. Eli forced himself upright against the doorframe, one hand pressed to his bandaged ribs. His face was pale, but his eyes were fixed on the riders. "They're not rustlers," he said hoarsely. "Not this lot." "Then who?" Mary's grip tightened on the rifle. "Men I used to ride with, men John was forced to ride with." The boy buried his face in her dress, and Mary felt her knees weaken, but she held her ground. By the time the riders reached the yard, the dust cloud hung thick around them. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a gray beard and eyes like polished stone, pulled his horse to a halt. He looked at Mary first, then at Eli. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled. "Eli Harper. Thought we left you for buzzards a long time ago." Eli straightened, though his breath came shallow. "Should have made sure." The men behind the leaders shifted in their saddles, rifles across their laps. They weren't here for a neighborly visit. Mary spoke before Eli could. "You've no business here. This is my land." The leader's gaze flicked back to her, heavy with mockery. "Land don't matter much when it hides a traitor." He jerked his chin toward Eli. "He stole something that belonged to us. We've come to collect." Mary's voice cut sharp. "All I see is a pack of thieves riding onto my ranch." The leader's grin faded. "Careful, widow. You don't want the boy inside to grow up without a mother." The boy whimpered, and Mary pushed him gently behind her. Her finger brushed the trigger of the rifle. Inside, Eli's hands trembled. He knew these men, knew the things they'd done when the war ended and the world forgot about them. Raiders with no country left but hunger. He stepped forward, pain etched in every movement. "It's me you want. Leave them out of it." The leader tilted his head, pretending to consider. "Might have been easier if you died quiet back then, but since you didn't..." His voice dropped low. "Where's the ledger?" Mary glanced at Eli, confused. "What ledger?" Eli didn't answer. The leader's smile was thin. "Told your husband to keep it safe. Names, debts, blood paid in silver. Without it, we got no hold over the men who still ride free. But your husband ran, and this one," he pointed his gloved finger at Eli, "knows where it went." Mary's heart twisted. "My husband, he was part of this?" Eli's silence was a confession. The air grew heavy. The horses stamped, restless. The boy peeked. From behind the doorframe, eyes wide as the prairie sky. Finally, Mary raised her voice. "You'll not take him. Not from this house." The leader chuckled darkly. "You're bold, widow. But bold don't stop bullets." He lifted his hand. The men shifted, rifles lifting, steel catching the last light of day. For a long moment, the world seemed to balance on the edge of a knife. Then Eli's voice cut through the stillness. "If you want it, you'll find it where John fell." The leader's smile froze. He studied Eli's face, searching for a lie, then gave a sharp whistle. The riders pulled back, circling like wolves. "Tomorrow," the leader called, eyes never leaving Mary. "We come at dawn. Have the ledger or we burn this place to the ground." With that, he wheeled his horse and the raiders melted back into the horizon, leaving behind silence more suffocating than their presence. Inside, the house felt smaller than it ever had. The boy clung to Mary's arm. "What do they want, Mama?" Mary smoothed his hair, her voice trembling. "Nothing will give them." She turned on Eli, her eyes blazing. "What have you dragged to my door?" Eli's face was hollow. "I should have left when I first rode up here. You should have told me the truth." He winced, not just from pain, but from something deeper. "The truth would have killed you quicker." Mary's hand shook on the rifle. "You knew John. You saw him alive. And now these men say he carried their mark." Eli met her gaze, steady for the first time. He fought against it, longer than any man could have. But they broke him, Mary. And I couldn't save him. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Mary's place, what choice would you have made? Comment below, don't forget to like if this story has you on edge and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Her breath caught. For years she'd prayed for news of her husband, prayed he'd come riding back. Now the truth sat in her kitchen, bleeding and broken, and it was worse than silence. That night they barred the doors and doused the lamps. Eli lay restless on the table, every sound outside making him flinch. Mary sat by the window, rifle in hand, watching the darkness. The boy slept fitfully, murmuring in dreams. At some point, Eli whispered into the shadows, "If I don't make it, tell him. I tried to be the man his father wanted me to be." Mary didn't answer. The weight of his words pressed heavy in her chest, but she couldn't decide if they were confession or curse. Near midnight, the sound came. Hoofbeats, slow, testing the ground. Mary's pulse raced. She raised the rifle, finger tight on the trigger. Through the slats of the shutter, she saw shapes moving against the starlit prairie. Not many. Scouts. They weren't waiting for dawn after all. They were coming tonight. The first shot never came. Instead, the sound that split the night was a low whistle. Sharp, deliberate, cutting through the prairie air like a blade. Eli stiffened on the table, eyes flashing wide. "That's their call," he rasped. "They're circling us." Mary pressed the boy against the wall, rifle tight in her hands. Her heart thudded so loud she thought the raiders outside might hear it. The house seemed to shrink around them. Every crack between the boards felt like an open wound. The lantern was long since extinguished, but moonlight pooled faint through the window, painting everything in a cold silver hue. For a time, silence. Just the restless shifting of horses, the faint clink of spurs. Then, knocking. 3 dull thuds. Against the door, not angry, not hurried. A patient knock, like a neighbor come calling. Mary raised the rifle, aiming at the door. The boy clung to her skirts, his face pressed into her side. "Don't," Eli hissed from the table. "That's what they want. They want you to fire first." The knock came again. Then a voice. Calm, steady. "Widow Whitfield. We don't want your blood, just what's owed. Send him out and you and the boy live easy." Mary's throat burned, but she answered, "You'll not have him, not while I draw breath." A pause. Then low laughter, spreading among the riders outside. Eli closed his eyes, his face contorted with guilt. "They won't stop. Not until I pay the debt." Mary spun on him. "What debt? What did you take from them?" He swallowed hard, voice breaking. "Not gold, not cattle. Names. I kept a ledger. Men who raided with us, men who paid blood money after the war. I swore I'd burn it, but I couldn't. Too many widows, too many graves. I thought maybe one day truth would matter." "And John?" she whispered. Eli's voice cracked. He guarded it, kept it hidden. They killed him for it. Mary staggered back as if struck. Her husband hadn't died a soldier's death. He'd died protecting the very thing that now threatened to destroy her. The boy tugged her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, I'm scared." Mary crouched, pulling him close, her voice shaking but firm. "We're together. That's what matters." Outside, the leader's voice rang again, sharper now. "Last chance, widow. The sun'll rise soon, and when it does, there won't be enough left of that house to bury." Mary rose slowly, rifle still in her hands, and looked at Eli. "If this ledger exists, where is it?" His lips trembled. "Buried? Northfield, under the lone cedar. That's why I came back, to finish what John started." Her eyes burned, with unshed tears. She hated him in that moment, for lying, for surviving, for bringing this upon her. But she also saw the truth in his face. He wasn't here to save himself. He was here because he couldn't outrun the weight of it anymore. Minutes, stretched like hours. The raiders made no move, only circling, waiting for fear to do their work. Then softly, Eli said, "Let me go out. End this." Mary's head snapped toward him. "You'd be signing your death. They came for me. Not for you. Not for the boy." His gaze was steady, though his body shook with pain. "John gave his life for that ledger. I can do no less." Mary's breath came ragged. She wanted to scream at him, to call him a coward for giving up, but the words died in her throat, because she saw in his eyes it wasn't cowardice. It was the first shred of honor he'd carried in years. The boy's voice was small but clear. "Don't let him, Mama." Mary gathered her son in her arms, pressing her lips to his hair. She didn't answer him. She couldn't. Then Eli pushed himself up, every movement agony, but his resolve unshaken. He looked at Mary one last time. "If I don't come back, tell him his father died a good man." Mary's chest tightened. She wanted to stop him, wanted to lock the door, and never let him face the wolves outside. But she also knew this was the only road left. He staggered to the door, rifle in hand. His shadow stretched long against the floorboards. For an instant he looked almost like John had, that first day he rode off to war. Mary's hand hovered, torn between pulling him back and letting him go. Finally, with a quiet creak, Eli opened the door. Moonlight poured in, and beyond it, a dozen riders sat waiting. Their faces were masks of hunger and hate. The leader's grin spread. "Harper, I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." Eli stepped onto the porch, breathing hard. "You want the ledger, I'll take you to it." The raiders stirred, murmurs rising. The leader studied him a long moment, then leaned forward in his saddle. "And the widow? The boy?" Eli's voice was iron. "They're not part of this. You want blood, you take mine." The leader chuckled low, but his eyes glittered. "We'll see." Mary stood frozen in the doorway, the boy clutching her hand. The prairie stretched endless behind the riders, the first hint of dawn just brushing the horizon. She didn't know if she was watching a sacrifice or the beginning of something worse. And as Eli limped forward into the circle of horses, lantern light flickering against his broken frame, she understood one thing with brutal clarity. The night wasn't over. It had only just begun. The horizon bled into pale gold as dawn broke, spilling long shadows across the prairie. The raiders sat their horses in a wide circle, breath steaming in the cool morning air. Their leader, Brant, waited with the stillness of a predator, eyes fixed on Eli Harper. Eli stood at the center, swaying from blood loss, but upright. His hand pressed tight against his ribs, his voice steady despite the weakness in it. "The ledger's buried under a cedar, North Field," he said. "I'll show you. Then you let them be." Brant leaned forward, beard glinting in the light. "I let no one be, Harper. But maybe I'll grant the widow a mercy." His gaze slid toward Mary, standing at the porch with the rifle clutched. Tight, the boy hidden behind her. Mary's stomach twisted, but she didn't lower her weapon. "You'll get nothing but lead if you touch him." The raiders chuckled among themselves. Brant's grin was thin as a knife. They rode north together, a grim procession across the waking land. Eli walked, limping, Brant and his men circling, him like wolves herding a stag. Mary followed on foot with the rifle, refusing to let distance swallow her courage. The boy trailed at her side, his small hand wrapped in her skirt. The lone cedar tree rose from the earth like a sentinel, its roots twisted deep into the soil. Beneath it, the ground was disturbed, faint but visible. Eli pointed. "There. That's where John left it." Two men dismounted, shovels biting into the dirt. Within minutes, metal struck wood. A small box, weathered but intact, was lifted from the earth. Brant dismounted, brushing the soil away with greedy hands. He cracked the lid open. Inside, bound in oilskin, was the ledger. The raiders leaned close, hungry for the secrets it carried. Names, accounts, debts written in a dead man's hand. Brant flipped through the pages, his grin widening. "Well now, with this, we own half the territory. Every man who paid to keep his sins hidden will bow or burn. He snapped the book shut, eyes glinting at Eli. You should have stayed gone, Harper. Could have saved yourself this ending. Eli's voice rasped, but held a steel Mary had never heard before. John died to keep that book from you. So will I. It happened fast. Eli lunged, tearing the ledger from Brant's hands. Pain ripped through him, but he clutched it tight and stumbled back toward the cedar. The raiders shouted, rifles snapping up. Mary raised her own rifle, firing before she knew she'd pulled the trigger. A shot cracked. A rider tumbled from his saddle. Chaos split the dawn. The boy screamed, covering his ears as the prairie thundered with gunfire. Eli staggered, clutching the ledger, then hurled it into the smoldering embers of a campfire the men had left from the night before. The oilskin caught, flame licking at the pages. Brant roared, swinging his pistol. A shot rang out. Eli jerked, stumbled, and fell to his knees. The ledger burned, smoke curling skyward like a prayer. Mary fired again, the recoil slamming her shoulder, but she didn't falter. The boy clung to her leg, sobbing, but she kept her eyes on Eli. He looked back at her through the smoke, blood staining his shirt, and in his eyes she saw not the broken man who had ridden onto her land, but something steadier. Peace. Brant's men scrambled, shouting, but it was too late. The ledger was gone, pages curling black into ash. Brant stood trembling with rage, pistol shaking in his grip. He leveled it at Mary. You'll pay for this. Before he could fire, Eli surged up one last time, slamming into Brant with a ragged cry. The pistol went wide, the shot vanishing into the prairie sky. Brant cursed, striking Eli down with the butt of the gun. Eli fell and did not rise again. The raiders froze, the fire crackling behind them. Without the ledger, their power had turned to smoke. One by one, they glanced at Brant, waiting for command. But Brant only stood over Eli's still body, his rage hollow. Finally, with a snarl, he spat into the dirt. Mount up. They rode off, without another word, leaving the cedar tree standing alone, its roots guarding ash and memory. Mary dropped to her knees beside Eli. His chest rose once, shallow, then again, slower. His hand found hers, rough and trembling. Tell him, Eli whispered, eyes flicking toward the boy. Tell him his father was brave, that he died a good man. Mary's tears fell onto his face. She wanted to tell him he'd live, wanted to beg him not to go, but she knew the truth when she saw it. Eli's gaze softened. I'm sorry, Mary, for the lies, for bringing it here. I just wanted to finish it. And then his hand went slack. The prairie grew quiet again, the dawn now full upon the land. Smoke curled from the fire, carrying with it the last of the ledger and the last breath of Eli Harper. Mary sat in the dirt, the boy pressed against her, both of them trembling. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of silence, not as loneliness, but as grief fully come home. Her husband was gone. Eli was gone. The truth was ash. And yet, in that hollow quiet, she knew she'd been left with something the raiders could never steal. Her boy, her land, and the memory of men who, broken though they were, had chosen in the end to stand for something greater than themselves. Years later, townsfolk would whisper about that dawn. Some swore the widow had made a deal with outlaws, others that she'd gunned them down herself. But Mary never corrected them. All she told her son when he was old enough to understand was this: your father died with honor, and the man who came back gave everything so we could live free. And on quiet mornings when the prairie wind carried the smell of smoke, she would stand at the cedar tree, her hand resting against its bark, and remember two men, different, flawed, and bound by a secret that she loved in ways she could never quite speak aloud. As the sun climbed, Mary took her boy's hand and led him back toward the house. The land stretched endless before them. Hard, unyielding, but theirs to claim. And though the world would never know the truth of what happened under that cedar, the widow did. It was written not in ledgers, but in ashes, in sacrifice, and in the silence of the Old West morning. If this story touched you, if it felt like more than just bullets and blood but about sacrifice, truth, and human kindness, then like this video, comment to share what it meant to you, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end. The rider came at dusk, horse lathered, head low, hooves striking sparks against the rock. By the time he reached the widow's ranch, the last light was fading into the kind of bruised purple sky that promised no comfort. He didn't knock, he didn't call out. He just slid from the saddle, stumbled against the porch rail and stood there swaying, blood soaking through the side of his shirt. Mary Whitfield stepped out with a lantern, her hand gripping the wooden post for balance. For a moment she thought it was him, her husband returning after 3 long years. But the face that looked back at her was younger, unshaven, eyes clouded with something she couldn't name. Not her husband. The ranch hand. And he was carrying something her heart wasn't ready for. The war, the truth, and a secret buried too deep to stay hidden. But let's go back to where it all started. If this story already feels like it's pulling you in, then hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe, because the journey is only just beginning. The year was 1872. The prairie had just begun to green after a winter that seemed it might kill them all. Mary's ranch sat a half-day's ride from town, spread wide over rolling grass and dry creek beds. The clapboard house was weathered gray, patched where the wind had torn shingles free, and the barn leaned a little east, as if tired of standing. But it was hers now, hers and the boys'. She still called it the boys' ranch when she spoke to neighbors, though her son was barely 7 and couldn't lift a saddle by himself. But folks around here respected the fiction because they pitied her, and pity was the closest thing to kindness some of them could offer. Her husband, John Whitfield, had gone off in a blue coat and brass buttons, promising to come back before the crops withered. He never did. The letter that finally reached her was brief. Killed at Stones River. Fell with honor. Honor didn't feed a child or mend a fence line. So she worked. Sun up to nightfall, and when her hands bled from splitting logs or her back screamed from carrying feed, she told herself John would have done the same for them. It was in those years of silence that the ranch hand came into her life. Eli Harper, barely 20 when he'd first ridden up asking for work. Said he'd fought too, though he never wore the coat. His eyes gave away little, but his hands, scarred, strong, restless, told stories she didn't ask about. She paid him in coin, when she could in bread and a dry bed when she couldn't. He stayed. The boy took to him quick. Eli taught him how to set a rabbit snare, how to whittle without cutting his thumb, how to whistle sharp enough to call a horse from pasture. Mary kept her distance, watching with that guarded look of women who've had to learn not to need. That evening the prairie was quiet. Too quiet. Mary felt it while fetching water from the well, a stillness that pressed heavy, like the land itself was waiting. Eli had been gone 3 days, riding fence lines and scouting sign of rustlers they'd heard were moving south. She hadn't expected him back tonight, but when the horse came in hard, and she saw him bleed across her porch, the quiet broke. The boy ran forward, lantern swinging, shouting Eli's name. Mary didn't move at first. Something in her resisted. Fear, maybe, or memory. Then she knelt, touched his shoulder, and felt how hot his skin burned. "Who did this?" she whispered. Eli's lips trembled, and for a heartbeat she thought he might say John's name. But all he managed was, they'll come for me." Inside the house, the lamp smoke curled in the corners. She laid him out on the table, tore his shirt open, and saw the wound. Knife, not bullet. A deep, cruel cut along the ribs, the kind meant to finish a man. The boy fetched water, his small hands shaking, and Mary worked in silence. Her own hands were steady. She'd had to sew gashes on calves, pull splinters from her son's feet, but the weight in the room was different. This wasn't an animal. This was the man who had carried half her burden these last years, the one who didn't ask questions about her grief. She pressed cloth against the wound, and Eli flinched, eyes snapping open. "You should have left me, out there," he said through gritted teeth. Her jaw tightened. "And let you die like a dog on the prairie? Would have been easier." She didn't answer. The boy was watching, wide-eyed, and she would not let fear be the lesson tonight. Hours passed. The wind rattled the shutters. Coyotes called from the far ridge. Eli drifted in and out, mumbling names Mary didn't know. Once, he muttered John's name again, clear this time. And her heart stumbled. She leaned close. "What do you know of my husband?" His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she thought he'd gone under for good. Then he forced a whisper. "Everything. Outside somewhere, in the dark, a horse neighed, not theirs. Not close, but close enough to make her blood run cold." She set the lantern low, gripped the rifle that leaned against the doorframe, and looked out across the prairie. Nothing moved, but the stillness was gone. Something was coming, and Mary Whitfield, widow, mother, and keeper of land too small for war but too wide for peace, felt the truth settle heavy in her chest. Eli had brought more than blood to her doorstep. He had brought the past, and the past was riding hard. The night held its breath. Mary sat in the kitchen, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the door. The boy had finally fallen asleep on the cot in the corner, his small chest rising and falling, with a rhythm that didn't belong in a house filled with fear. Eli stirred on the table. His shirt was peeled back, bandages wrapped tight around his ribs, the lantern throwing yellow light over his sweat-soaked face. His hand twitched as if grasping for a weapon that wasn't there. "Water," he croaked. Mary poured from the jug, lifted his head and held the cup to his lips. He drank, coughed, then pushed her hand away. "You should take the boy and ride," he muttered. "Head south, tonight." Her eyes narrowed. "And leave you here?" "Not likely. You don't understand what's coming. Then make me understand." Eli's silence lasted long enough that she thought he'd pass out again. But then he opened his eyes and spoke low, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "Your husband, John, he wasn't killed at Stone's River like the letter said. He lived. For a time." Mary froze. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She wanted to shake him, demand he take the words back. But the way he looked at her, tired, unflinching, told her he believed it. "You're lying," she whispered. "I was there," Eli said. His hand trembled as he tried to prop himself up. "I fought beside him. We got separated. The report came back wrong. He wasn't dead. He was captured." Her voice cracked. "By who?" Eli's gaze drifted to the shadows. "Not soldiers, not blue or gray. Raiders. Men who fought for themselves and nothing else. When they took him, I couldn't stop it." Mary felt her knees weaken. She gripped the rifle tighter just to stay steady. "You knew this all these years," she hissed, "and you said nothing?" Eli's jaw clenched. "I thought he died soon after. Truth is, I saw him once more. Alive. Months later. But he wasn't the same man. They broke him. Used him." Her heart throbbed with a pain sharper than any blade. "Used him for what?" Eli's answer was a whisper. "For blood." Before she could press him further, hoofbeats cracked the night. Not one horse, many. Mary set the cup down, rose slow, and crossed to the window. Lantern light in the distance. Figures moving along the ridgeline, her stomach turned. "Who is it?" she asked without looking back. Eli's silence was answer enough. By dawn, smoke was curling above the far horizon. Word would spread fast. In a town where everyone already whispered about the widow and her hired hand, it wouldn't take much to set fire to their names. Sure enough, by midday, neighbors began arriving. First Old Man Kettle, riding his mule and squinting at the barn, like it might hold secrets. Then the Turner brothers, lean and mean from years of bad crops, muttering about rustlers seen near the river. Mary stood on the porch, skirts dusty, rifle leaned against the doorframe. She gave them nothing but a level stare. "Morning, Ms. Whitfield," Kettle called. "Heard tell there was trouble last night." "Coyotes," she answered flatly. The Turners exchanged looks. Coyotes don't bleed a man half to death, one of them said. Mary didn't flinch. Then you heard wrong. The boy wandered out, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and spotted Kettle. Mr. Eli's hurt, he said innocently. Mary's gut clenched, but it was too late. The men's faces darkened. Inside, Eli struggled to sit upright, listening through the open window. He could almost taste the suspicion in their voices. Kettle spat in the dirt. Ain't wise harboring trouble, widow. Not with talk of raiders in the hills. He's no raider, Mary snapped. The older man's gaze lingered on her too long. Maybe so, but if the wrong folks come asking, you'll wish you'd turned 'em out. When they rode off, leaving behind only a trail of dust and doubt, Mary stepped inside. She slammed the door, her breath shaking. Eli looked at her from the walls. They'll come back next time with more questions. Then talk, she hissed. Tell me what you've done. Tell me why men ride the ridge at night. Tell me why they whisper my husband's name like it ain't buried. He leaned forward, every word costing him. Because John Whitfield didn't die as a soldier. He lived long enough to wear another man's brand, and now someone out there thinks I carry his sins. Mary staggered back, hand over her mouth. The boy watched her, confused, frightened. Mama, she forced her voice steady. Go to your room. When the boy was gone, the room grew quiet again. Mary's hand hovered near the rifle. She wasn't sure if she wanted to aim it at the door or at Eli Harper.